and welcome to Rockanory. This reading is going to be from Kirk Lake's fantastic Rufus Wainwright biography, There Will Be Rainbows, that came out on Orion last year. And as always, there is a link beneath this video where you can find the book online. So there you go. And this extract is voted for by the lovely members of the Facebook Rockanory page, so I hope you enjoy this. And yeah, this is around the time that Rufus is he's in his early teens, and he's coming to terms with his sexuality, but he's also starting to write a lot of music in earnest. By the time he was 13, Rufus knew he was gay. He was comfortable with his sexuality and made no real attempt to hide it, but the spectre of AIDS loomed large in the mid-80s, and like many who grew up during this period, he had a nagging sense of dread of what would become of him. At the same time that Rufus was trying to come to terms with the fact that his sexuality, in effect his very essence, may sentence him to a life of either virtual celibacy or inevitable infection, he had an epiphany. He had already discovered classical music and would spend hours listening to Chopin in Kate's bedroom. He had already investigated classical vocal records by the likes of Beniamo Gigli and Jussi Björling. One day, Kate brought home a copy of Fritz Reiner's 1959 recording of Verdi's Requiem that featured Björling and Leontine Price, and it changed the way Rufus listened to music forever. Almost instantly, he became besotted with opera, relating its treatment of death and the drama of love with his own sexuality and fear of disease. It came at a junction in my life where I was completely hit simultaneously by different things. One, that I was gay. Two, being that AIDS was on the scene. This thrilling, consoling music immediately hooked into all the emotions I was feeling, he later explained. After hearing Verdi, Rufus listened almost exclusively to opera, ignoring the top 40 stations that Martha enjoyed, and giving up on the likes of the Thompson twins or the Eurythmics, whom he'd previously loved. He had battles with Kate, who he'd later say was furious that he'd become involved in this escapist, rather dark medium. Rufus claimed that she would play him what he disparagingly called poor people's music, to demonstrate to him what he should be listening to, but he would counter by just playing more Verdi and turning up the volume. Rufus started visiting the antique shops and cafes along Saint Laurent Boulevard, the road that separates Montreal into French and English sides. It was exciting to get out of the pretty but dull Westmount neighbourhood where he lived. Before long, he'd discovered Montreal's gay village, around St. Catherine Street. He'd begun sneaking out of the house and going down to the gay bars to hang out. He admits to having been a Lolita-esque character, a 14-year-old boy who looked no older than his years, leaning at the bar, craving attention from adult men. He said that although these jaunts into town were driven by a strong sexual yearning and a need to experiment, they were partly driven by a need to find a male role model. He lived with his mother and sister, and although he had a strong, loving family, he found that with Loudon never present, and Kate's boyfriend Pat Donaldson understandably reluctant to try and take his place, he lacked a real father figure, and he sometimes confused the sexual attention of men with his need for male guidance and advice. There were drinking laws, but they obviously didn't enforce them, he says. I was a young 14. I looked like an underdeveloped lizard. Although he did nothing to hide the fact he was homosexual, Kate was in denial, even after she'd found a gay porn magazine hidden under his bed. Loudon, ever the pragmatist, had flat out asked him if he preferred boys to girls. Although neither parent was especially homophobic, they still found it difficult to deal with. His father just tried to ignore the subject and let it play out over time, while his mother, and later the AIDS crisis as much as anything, and fearing for the well-being of her son, chose to pretend it wasn't a real issue and wouldn't discuss it at all. In 1986, while staying with Loudon in New York, Rufus was sent over to see his father's friend, the artist Penny Arcade, whom Loudon had briefly run off to Europe with in the early days of his marriage to Kate. Arcade had become a family friend and would subsequently exert an important influence on Rufus's artistic development. She'd appeared in the Andy Warhol film Women in Revolt, and had subsequently gone on to write, produce and perform a series of cutting-edge shows and performance pieces that used sexuality and feminism to push the boundaries of experimental theatre and artistic confrontation. When Rufus was about 14, Loudon started to think he might be gay, remembers Arcade. I'd seen Rufus at a birthday party for Loudon when he'd been 12, and I'd realised he was gay then. Loudon called me and said, "If Rufus is gay, then you're the best person for him to know." I understood some of the issues that would be created by Rufus being gay in that family at the time, clearly, as there would be for most families of young teens in the mid-80s, in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. So I took Loudon's call very seriously. From then on, whenever Rufus was in New York, he would visit Arcade and be introduced to her East Village associates. She would remain a confidant to Rufus for many years, taking a compassionate interest in his upbringing, acting as a kind of surrogate parent whenever he was in town. Indeed, Rufus would come to refer to her as his New York mother, and she supported him both artistically and emotionally, as later she would Martha. Arcade played a pivotal role in Rufus's development as an artist, as she became a conduit to ideas and influences that were more challenging, more avant-garde, and more appealing to Rufus than those of the artistic circle his parents had mixed in. Arcade remembers Loudon and Rufus attending a party she was holding to celebrate New Year's Day 1987. There were many of my East Village circle there, including Quentin Crisp and Jack Smith. Rufus was introduced to Quentin that day, but had little interest then, so probably doesn't remember. After all, Quentin was a very old man. Rufus was quite intrigued by Edgar Oliver, the writer and actor, who was a dandy and spoke French and drank a lot of red wine out of a Coke bottle, and his sister, the painter Helen Oliver. They were very glamorous in a true East Village, edgy 1980s bohemian way. It was important to Arcade that Rufus got to meet many of the hippest New York artists, including taking him to see Patti Smith, with whom she'd worked since the 60s, and Taylor Mead, the poet, and sometime Warhol film star. She gave Loudon and Rufus tickets to see her shows, including a performance of her breakthrough work, Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore, at Performance Space 122, an experimental art centre located in an abandoned school. The show featured male and female strippers, and Arcade performed a burlesque striptease that she remembers horrified Loudon. Rufus absolutely loved it. Later it would go on to great acclaim at theatre festivals around the world. If Rufus couldn't remember meeting Crisp at the party, he did later recall seeing him at Arcade's apartment. Far from being the recipient of any of Crisp's bon mots, Rufus can't recall ever being spoken to at all. Perhaps, though, Crisp's very being was enough to empower Rufus. After all, he had dealt with his own sexuality back in the more repressed 1930s by deciding that he would live his life not merely as a self-confessed homosexual, but a self-evident one. I'm going to leave it there, but that was an extract from There Will Be Rainbows by Kirk Lake, the biography of Rufus Wainwright, which came out on Orion Books. And I hope you enjoyed that, and watch out for the next reading, which will be